I started a program called Data Scientist Training for Librarians. I really wanted to empower librarians to really be able to provide services in this brave new world. And I guess my story begins with, I actually am the head librarian of the Center for Astrophysics, but I have a humanities degree. I have a history degree. And when I got out of school, I was very interested in the web, the power of communication in the web. And I guess at that point I was digital humanities, when still sexy then. And so what I did was actually, and this is for the students in our audience, is I actually taught myself programming by picking up a C++ book and just diving into that thing for like 2 weeks, right? And I remember I was way over my head and tried to get a job in the web world, and eventually ended up at CNET doing data mining and warehousing. But I was over my head that whole time. Like, it was hard. I got into it, and I really attribute that as the first step to really, being able to do the things that I think I can do now, and the knowledge that I have. When I was at CNET, when I got that job, I did data mining. I created faceted searching, and created just user experiences, right? So I was grabbing data from all different places and trying to normalize it, create an experience. Later on, I feel like that experience is sort of morphed in different areas. So another example is when I finally came to libraries. I always felt like I was a librarian, I suppose. When I came to libraries at the Supreme Court, I remember the library was really trying to make, they had tension with IT. IT just treated them a certain way, the librarians. And I remember the databases in the court were completely open. They had a SQL server. And I was able to turn around in one of our meetings and say, I can access the justices' databases when we created the search. And it was like this great experience. I remember my manager saying, now I feel empowered. They're treating us differently. They've looked at us differently. And then just recently, too, I remember landing at the European Southern Observatory, and they do a lot of bibliometrics. They do a lot of things to try and understand how the observatory is matching up with other observatories. And they had a very manual process. And I remember coming in and just automating that, a triage system that could allow them to mine the literature and create data links. But throughout that, just technology has been empowering. I'm looking at all the students. But I can't speak to you more about this. It's been an empowering experience throughout my life. And I really hope that you have the time to do this now. Now is the time to really do this, because fast forward to present as a head librarian, the skills that I need are those skills. I need tech-savvy, data-savvy librarians coming out to be able to really dive into the work that we're doing. It's really across the board. And data services, or whatever you call it, I'm kind of turning around and thinking this is really a life cycle kind of thing, that it's skull data, whatever I can call it, because it's not. It's about the ecosystem overall from what we've experienced locally. But just to go back to the data scientist training for our librarians program, the reason why that came to be were various reasons. One was that empowering. The librarians. I saw a lot of, there's a local example. We had this library lab project at in the Harvard libraries, where they gave us money and they asked the librarians to come up with ideas, and they shopped all that. We came up with the ideas and they shopped it out to Berkman. And at the end of the day, the librarians were not developing these tools. And we were handed tools, and we didn't know how to use them in the end, and there was no longevity in that. And so that was one part where I wanted to empower the librarians. We were sort of same scenario. IT said, no, we'll do it for you, and you come up with the ideas. The other thing, too, is that right around the time that I landed at the Center for Astrophysics Library, this is a common story. our astrophysicists were saying, well, I don't understand why we need a library anymore. That's one thing, right? Show us what the library of the future is. And then also there was the NSF stuff coming out. And I remember hearing from a lot of libraries that were trying to tackle it, and it seemed to me that the librarians in that situation had not been exposed to actually worked with data, right? I'm sorry to say, but I went to a lot of these presentations, and I really wondered if they actually had, the hands-on experience. And locally, so some of the librarians coming out of Simmons and library school, they were, I was trying to train them. I'd run in and say, this should work, and then run out, and there was no structured program, and so actually my staff encouraged me to create the program. And so really it came about through those organic means, and then opened it up to others. So I wanted to train my staff, but I wanted to open it up to the community. I wanted to do a very non-Harvard thing, which is open up Harvard to other libraries. And really at the bottom line of the program was that the number one goal was it just experienced the research data life cycle. So at least the bottom line was you understood really what was going on, like you had a general idea. You didn't have to come out as a programmer, but you had a better idea of what that world was, right? And so that really was the bottom line, what I wanted to do in the program. I also wanted librarians to really get their hands dirty with the tools, to experience the tools that our researchers were using. I know a lot of people say it's not about the tools sometimes, but I do think it is about the tools sometimes because they represent concepts. For instance, one is GitHub. I think that is a fundamental tool for open science. I think it really demonstrates a lot of concepts that we as librarians need to adopt, right? That if my wife is telling me that I'm saying right too much, so I noticed it right now. But that was another thing too, is that what if in the program that our librarians could actually pick up a skill and pick it up and start running with it in the library scene. And some people did do that in the program. I've run about 4 training programs now. It's 160 librarians, and that's worldwide now because the Danish librarians are very into this and they're running the program on their own. And there is general interest from all libraries around the world, so Australia, New Zealand. And the fun part is trying to reimagine what will help people reimagine what librarians can do. And there was a tweet just recently where Matt and I were referenced from Andrew Odawan from O'Reilly, who said, I'm really starting to have a different opinion of librarians, that they really know some things, like we should work with them. And I think that's been one of also the fundamental things too that the program did, which is I always felt like there was a barrier. If our researchers came, they didn't think that we were doing these kind of things, and they didn't come to us with all their other needs. And I think the one thing that this program and what we've embodied in the Center for Astrophysics Library is that we've demonstrated, we've shown our community that we know a lot of these different tools, and they're coming to us more, and that barrier is removed, it's being removed. And the greatest thing is I'm being included, my library staff is being included in a lot of projects now because they see us differently from one of these, the major ideas from data scientist training for librarians. The other thing was the mindset of libraries. I think we're very process driven. We have committees. We're not nimble. And I think one thing that in this space, the data scientist training for librarians was to try and be just more abstract. Like, here's a problem and try and fix it. And that was one thing that I think developed in some people, maybe it didn't in others, but it was really like to create a different mindset of not saying I only do this or I only do that, but being more of a robust person and being open to trying something. When we're doing more programmatic things in the program, I remember some of the librarians actually still trying to write their first line of code, right? And it will blow up on you at first, but those first steps are very hard. And that was one of the things that I tried to do, is lessen the barrier. And then to grow a community. And in some ways, maybe there is a community that was grown. I've seen some of the people that were in the program here today, and it's nice to see that sort of network from the program. But overall, I can just describe to you what the general philosophy is, that through the tools sort of concepts arise, and we allow people to sort of find their path, find the things that they are interested in the program. So we start off with wrangling, with starting off slowly with some of the more manageable tools like OpenRefine and Excel, and then moving on to something more programmatic like Python or R, and then sort of going on into the analysis side, which a lot of the librarians in the program said was like drinking from the fire hose, and that's the particular part that we've had a hard time with, I think. But then the visualization side too, and using programs like Tableau as easy step-ins. And I think overall, I've realized too, one of the fundamental things that I've learned from this program is managers. It's very important for managers to learn this as well, because they need to understand that this is hard stuff to learn, and that they need to give their staff the time to learn how to do this. And a manager sort of needs to know, where are we headed? How is this hooking into this particular thing and hooking into that? And just knowing that that's not a particularly easy thing to do, but also helping his or her staff to give them a larger perspective of where this fits in with things. And that was really one of the other things about data scientist training for librarians, was you're learning all this stuff, and then you'd have these moments where you'd stop and there was this context, right? Someone would come in and say, this is why you're learning this. This is why this is important. And I kind of went around a little bit there, but it's really the gist of this. And again, trying to prepare what happens to librarians when we don't go through a program like Syracuse. We're already practicing librarians. Or what happens when you're a library school student that doesn't have a data science program yet. This was a program, I think, in response to that, to try and get us geared up and ready for the future. So.
Just pulling up my notes. So, like Julie said before, I'm actually not a librarian. I'm a PhD student at Illinois, but I'm glad to be on the practitioners panel, because a lot of my work and my background is very practice-based. So before I started my graduate work, but not in a library, as you'll hear. Before starting graduate work, I worked at the La Brea Tar Pits in Los Angeles, so that's the Page Museum at the La Brea Tar Pits, as an excavator. So it's a very long and kind of confusing story about how I wound up getting that job, considering I have a degree in English. But that was my first job out of college after volunteering there for a while. Initially my job was to dig saber-toothed cat fossils, direwolf fossils, mammoth fossils out of the ground. That was what I was supposed to be doing. People have been doing this at the Page Museum since about 1908, but their current excavation has been ongoing since 1969, and they've been digging these fossils out in a very methodical, excavation protocol that's taken out of archaeology rather than paleontology, actually. So every single bone comes out with a huge amount of very precise geolocation data. So the XYZ coordinates of up to 3 points for every single fossil. Considering the museum has approximately, we're not totally sure because they've not all been cataloged, 4 million fossils, this is a huge amount of data. So I, through the course of being an excavator there, I quickly became obsessed with organizing this information and in the extremely piecemeal system that we had for organizing this information. Our databases were either paper catalog ledgers or index cards, field notebooks, and there were some computerized databases, but one of them was made in the 70s and it wasn't really ever double checked, and the file didn't really work on any computer except for this one blue screen DOS machine in my boss's office. The rest were in Excel files, things like that. So I was told that to try to talk about, how I gained my data science competencies on this panel. So my first experience was working at the tar pits and trying to dig myself out of Excel files and teach myself technologies and tools for managing all of this data. The first thing I started learning was Microsoft Access out of a book that one of the volunteers at the museum let me borrow. And I started trying to learn database design and relational theory through that, and with a little bit of her help. And started trying to get that implemented in our museum, which I did successfully build a database. I did not successfully get it implemented because one of the really important things in data science or in informatics is suiting the tool to the community that's trying to use the tool. Turns out that not everybody in the museum was as excited about databases as I was, so it wound up getting exported back out into an Excel file. But that experience is what wound up leading me to grad school, initially just for a master's degree, but now for a PhD in information science, because I'm really interested in trying to not just build tools and learn skills for organizing data, but making sure that they actually work for the people that are organizing the data. So that can include librarians, or it can include the actual researchers doing that work. So in grad school, I chose to go to Illinois, even though I'm from California, beautiful, sunny Los Angeles, because they had the data curation specialization. So I was one of those students that was very fortunate to have a lot of data science specialty classes while I was there. So I did complete that specialization. However, the thing is with those classes, and there's always a next big thing. As I was finishing up my master's program, we started the socio-technical data analytics program, which had slightly different classes and a slightly different certification that I could have gotten had I just started 1 year later, or taken another semester worth of classes. Now I think the program, we're now going to be offering an MSIM. It's a Master of Science in Information Management, I believe. That sounds really useful. I think Illinois is also, so the iSchool is partnering with CS for an online data science class through Coursera or something like that. That also sounds like I should probably take that. But I'm at the point in my PhD now where I am not allowed to take classes anymore. My advisor will yell at me. And so that's also one of the big challenges for anybody leaving school and going on to work, is how do you keep up with, what's the new word for what we've been doing probably for the last 40, or in the case of biology or natural history museums, 300 years of managing information and managing data. So for me, and this is also how I became an English major, or an English major became a paleontologist kind of. It's always, a lot of it comes down to continuing to work with the communities that I'm trying to help. So now as a student and scholar, I still try to go to conferences that are even though I primarily identify as an information scientist, I try to make sure to get to as many conferences as I can in the domain sciences that I'm interested in. So that includes things like AGU, so that's the American Geophysical Union, ESIP is the Earth Science Information Partners, SPINACH, which is the Society for the Preservation of Natural History Collections. So they all have impossible acronyms. But they're all primarily domain conferences that are very informatics friendly. It is good to try to find the ones that are informatics friendly. But that's how I've been able to continue connecting with the people that I want to keep working with throughout the rest of my career. So the upside of that is that it is a really great way to stay connected with people and to learn what the new problems are that need to be solved, and learn what's really bothering people about the technology that they're using. The bad thing is that takes time and money. So it's a huge balancing act, and I know a lot of people that are working librarians. I friends with a good number of people working in data services at the Illinois Library. It's a huge challenge to try to get that support from your administrators to go to conferences and things like that. So I realize this is probably a very annoying thing to hear, but that is one of the most important things. That's one of the most important ways that I've been able to get experience in this area. I think the last little bit that I did want to try to make sure to say, for keeping up competencies outside of the classroom, it's been really important for me. I've stayed on a number of grants over the course of my of school, and it's really hard to. I work on a lot of different things in those grants. And it's really hard to remember the things that I learned 2 years before when I was in class sometimes for the purposes of those grants. So for me, it's been really important to be in an environment where it's okay for me to take a little bit longer to try to remember that thing in stats that I learned 3 years ago and haven't had to necessarily use since, and have mentors and bosses that are willing to give me that little bit of extra time to open up the textbook again, do a little bit of Googling, and get used to it. That's been really important in not just keeping up my skill set, but also fighting imposter syndrome, which will very quickly creep in if you give it the opportunity. And I do think that that's very important for a lot of us coming from these very broad backgrounds. Many of us are humanists, many of us don't have a huge mathematical or computational skill set. So that has been key for me. So I think that's about it.
Okay, I have come into this very differently. I actually did start with a science background, ecology and evolution. I actually had Fortran training, but that was back in the 1980s, and so it really does me no good whatsoever anymore. And so in some ways, I'm coming into it as the same way as the students are now. The training that I received with my degree, it was great very early on. It helped me with a lot of different things. I had research stuff in my degree. So when I took my master's degree and we had a research course, I knew what was going on. I knew what the statistics were because I'd had to use those. I did field research and studied animal movement. So I understood all that. Early on, I helped with CDs being introduced into the library. That's how long ago it was, Medline CDs. So it came to the point where I had to start learning new things. I went through various changes. I got to Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, and all of a sudden I'm working with DNA. I have to do something. So I brought in people from NCBI to do training. We had the GenBank discs. Again, it was still discs back when I first started in the early 1990s. And I started to have to learn myself. There was nothing in my training at that point, and electronic journals started at that time. Nothing in my training that had prepared me to do that. These things had all come along since I'd got my degree, and I had to learn everything. And I think in any of these positions that we're talking about, especially related to data, it doesn't matter what your background is, you're going to have to keep learning things. And I'm sure the other librarians will say the same thing who've been around, maybe not as long as I have, but almost as many years. It's constantly learning. So when I was starting to get back up to speed after some time off, I had done photographic databases, things like that. I ended up going to Woods Hole when they had the Biomedical Informatics Institute there. I discovered through Joan Ash that, I see somebody doing this, yeah. I discovered through Joan Ash that OHSU is doing a biomedical informatics certificate and you could get all your tuition paid, so I was able to get the scholarship. And I spent a year intensively learning this stuff. But It was me deciding I need to know this in order to continue on in my career the way I know it's going to go when I go back into full-time work. And so I was ready when a data position came open to be able to take that over and to work with the researchers and the faculty. And I'm lucky in that my background carries some weight with some of the faculty that, yes, I was there. I do know about bioinformatics. I do have some training. Cold Spring Harbor opens a lot of doors in the field of biomedical informatics. So that was very lucky. They take you a little more seriously than they might if you didn't have that behind you. But everybody else doesn't care. So I think you've got to be able to show them that you know what you're doing. And I think after listening to the other two panelists here, the really important thing you will have heard from all of us is that we are very curious. We want to learn this. We're very interested in. You have to be totally self-motivated, and you have to continuously learn things. There is no way you can stop learning at any point in your career. If you want to stop learning, you're going to be stuck as a clerk at the desk, and when the desks all go, there's going to be nothing you can do. I think you're going to have to accept that. You have to learn something, and you have to learn regularly. Work to get in a position where they will help you with that. I've been very, very lucky in being supported in paying for courses, a data curation course, things like that. And ask for it. Ask for those things that you need and see if you can't get them, because you're not going to be able to adapt. I mean, now it's GitHub, and it's great we know about GitHub. What's the next thing? Do we know? We don't. And so from the 10 years from when I got my degree to when I was worrying about electronic journals at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, there was a huge, huge change. In another 10 years, we're going to see the same thing, if not sooner. So you're going to have to adapt to it. Now, luckily, learning Fortran in high school a long, long time ago, somehow some parts of it have stuck with me. So when I had to use SQL and I had to use R, it makes sense. It makes sense. And so, being adaptable and taking what you've learned and making it feel broader so that you can fit in other things is helpful. So those are the kinds of things you need to think about as you're doing this. And the biggest thing, of course, is being patient with the people you're working with. I have always been a proponent that the reference skills that I learned have been useful in everything. I had amazing instructors who talked about neutral questioning and active listening and things like that. They were very early on. Catherine Ross was my professor at the library school in Canada. Excellent. That is the skill that I've needed the most everywhere I've gone and everything I've done, is listening to people, finding out what they really need. And we saw that earlier, that doing that analysis to see what that person is really having a problem with, that's what you need. So hopefully you will all realize that you can't stop learning here. You're going to have to keep doing this. I'm afraid it's just not going to change. So, yes, be interested in everything. Take every course you can. And we're very lucky now that you have MOOCs that you can go and do it, and you don't have to continually pay and go to courses. You can do it on your own time. So, I think I'm done. Anybody have questions?
Mike?
Hi. So my question to this panel is, what do you see as the gap between current data science coverage in library information science and being a data scientist, being a data science librarian? Do you see any apparent gaps or difference?
I must admit, I do not consider myself a data science librarian. I am actually, when I talked to a group of people, they're setting up the data warehouse for the electronic health records data, and they've been interviewing people who work with it, and they were telling me about the position that they're going to have for the person to guide people through all the data in the warehouse, because it's all so complicated. They're going to call it a data concierge. And so that's kind of, I'm guiding people through it. I think at least at the kind of academic institution that I'm at, I have to be very careful not to help the students too much. I have to be very careful when helping faculty that I don't go beyond what I'm really comfortable with, because I don't want to make that if my training is not in what they are doing, I would rather they go see the biostatistics department and get the analysis help from them. So, you know, I collaborate with all those departments so I can make sure people get expert help in what they need, because I am not an expert, and so I'm more a facilitator. So, but you guys, you're experts.
Right, expert.
I would say that I'm not sure if I would call it a gap necessarily, but I do, and I also don't want to argue about words too much, but I do get a little nervous talking about data science as one big homogeneous thing. I think the kind of data science you're going to do in chemistry is going to be very different from what you would do in astronomy versus biology versus subsets of biology. Like I did paleontology, and even the paleontology that we did at the tar pits is very different than the work that you do at other sites. So one thing I would love to see this magically happen. Who knows how this would happen? But I have hugely benefited from these one-on-one, very immersive experiences in internships and in my own work experience. And I've seen other students benefit from this as well through, there's like alternative spring breaks where they go off and work with somebody for a week, practicums where they have great internships with businesses and things like that. And I know that support is really hard to do, and setting students up with those kinds of experiences is really hard to do, but it's completely valuable. I've now been at Illinois for about 6 years, and I've seen a lot of master's students go through, and the ones that are getting the really cool jobs are the ones that are really putting themselves out there, for one thing, and working their butts off to get these internships, but that are also getting the support in order to get placed in these programs. So I think that's really critical.
Yeah, and I saw a gap. I really, in the conversations I was having with what my scientists perceived the library as before I arrived, and nowadays is completely different, because we've showed them, in other libraries. I have a local example of a library that was not able to demonstrate its value, through these, that gap grew larger and larger, and they didn't address it. But again, you can apply yourself. You should, try to learn as much as you can. But I really bring it back to, you should have these learning experiences in your work as well.
That's true.
It's very important, because all of us have limited time. And I've done my best to try and incorporate this into the work that we do at the Center for Astrophysics Library. But the gap also exists with our astrophysicists, right? The astrophysicists actually peeked into the training program, and they said, we want to do this too. And there were amazing things that happened. We had hack days where astrophysicists I'd say, do you want to show up? We're going to do some hacking. And they'd show up, and they learned, like, just recently, one of the people that helped with that hack day, he still references the fact that he learned pandas, it's just in Python. He learned it in our hack day, and he's now the data science lead at Legendary. And now he's coming back and saying, I absolutely believe the library needs to be involved in the overall, data services of the Center for Astrophysics. So he's actually writing our proposal for the director. And that's also great for bridging that gap, is when you can have them communicate, you can have other PhDs communicate with other PhDs, and they can convince each other. But that's the gap is really a danger right now for a lot of libraries, and that's what I was responding to. Really wanted to, and one of the things that our librarians, the librarians said in the program afterwards, is that, why do we have to call it data scientist training for librarians? Why can't it be data savvy? Because data science was very intimidating, and I think what they learned in that was more or less how to participate in a team, because data science is a team sport. And librarians are actually pretty darn good at different aspects of that, like the storytelling, the project management, domain expertise, being able to actually find sources for data and organize the early stages of the project. We did this exercise with EMC in a big data analytics course, and they were like, wow, librarians, we need a librarian on our team, because the other people, we really were able to glue things together in these teams.
I wanted to ask you a question. Actually, our students are here today, the group there, and maybe some of the same questions that are being asked. I mean, what do you think you would have liked to have had many of you graduating today, hearing this conversation today?
We're putting you on the spot.
Yeah, and you get 2 words for Chris.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to hear from you all, to just kind of your impressions of what kind of training you would have liked to see.
You should take it. I told you I'd put you on the spot, maybe.
Okay, hi, Megan. I work for Chris. Well, I've gotten a lot out of working at the Center for Astrophysics, and so I know that my experience is very different than a lot of my Simmons fellows, or my fellow students, just because I have had that opportunity to do a lot of learning on the job. And I would definitely say, to sort of reiterate that, of getting that support to teach yourself how to do things within the context, and then being given the opportunity, for anyone who's employers here, to give your students a task that sounds kind of outrageous, it sounds kind of impossible, and then sort of support them through the process of doing that. Like one of the first big projects that I got at the Center for Astrophysics was designing an interface and getting all this data into a database for a researcher. I had done none of that. I'd just been coming in talking about how excited I was about LIS 488, which is our tech class, and how I was doing all this interface design, or HTML and stuff like that. And Chris was like, oh, I had a conversation with this researcher, he kind of wanted to do this, well, maybe you could do that. And I had no idea what I was doing, and all I had to do was say, sure, yeah, I can do that. No idea what I'm doing. But he gave me a 3-month, lead time to be doing other things in the library, but also to be learning how to actually execute that. And I had people on staff that I could ask. And he gave me resources that I could, reach out to. And I did it, and it worked. And so I guess those opportunities, I think, were the biggest. And then also having the data scientist training for librarians. And I think something like that incorporated into our curriculum at school would be wonderful. And I also learned a lot from the class on scientific research data management that we were all in together. And you'll see our posters out there. That gave us the opportunity to hear from so many different librarians who are working in the field and what everyone else is doing. I think that just hearing from so many people and getting to ask them questions and hearing about some of the devices that are out there and tools that are available, but also how to teach ourselves about them, I think all of that is what I've gained a lot from. And I think that those experiences, the immersive experiences, are invaluable to learning.
In my high school, we did a lot of process learning rather than content learning, and it seems to me that a lot of what we do at Simmons are sort of skills and content that we're going to need in workplace, which is obviously really useful, but I think also a class on learning how to teach yourself programming or learning how to teach yourself the next new thing could be a really useful class, because not everyone knows how to self-teach. And that could be something that the school offers to us, because we only have, however many credits to to take there before they sort of want you to graduate. And so you can't just stay there and keep learning all the new things that come up. And obviously librarianship is a really fast-moving field, fast-growing. So I see that as being something that could be useful.
Anybody else over there?
Hi, I'm Anna. When I'm thinking about the original question about a gap in LIS education and data science, I think for me, it lies in having practical applications for the skills that you're learning. I think the most successful classes that I've taken at Simmons, including the research data management class, there was a practical application where you were, talking to a researcher and coming up with a case study and data management plan that was based on actual research. Or, for example, a digital libraries class where you're actually creating a digital library. So I think in terms of the gap there, I think it would be great if LIS education was more hands-on, was more kind of skills-based, kind of what Megan was talking about, but be able to actually experiment with real applications for projects. I think that's really important as well.
One of the most important things in the program too is the ability to fail and acknowledge it. One thing that we say often in our library is that it should work as sort of an acknowledgement. We're going to try this. It should work. It's going to blow up and it's fine. But also to build in at least some leeway in other things. You know it's going to fail, or maybe it could be glorious, but at least you build in some time and other things like that to compensate for that failure. But that's one thing I think we have a hard time with in libraries, is the ability to try something and fail, and at least we tried it, and let's learn from it. At least in my current environment in the Harvard Library, that's a hard one.
So, Ron had this question about, where is theory in data science? And there's always the perennial theory versus practice tension that I know when I teach master's students, they're like, I don't want this theory stuff, give me the practical stuff. And maybe it's, there are all ways of blending these together, but I'd be curious how a theoretical model or a conceptual framework for data science might be then also useful or not useful for folks looking at it from the practice perspective.
I can say one thing to that, because most of my work, I'm not doing a lot of the nitty-gritty. I'm helping researchers with a whole lab worth of problems, like a whole research thing, and having to do a workflow analysis. You have to have something more conceptual than just being able to program to help with the whole process. You have to be able to figure out how are they thinking, how are they understanding this, how is the group working together. Yeah. And so that's a very different, so it's going to depend on what you want to do in it. But the having some theoretical background, that's the whole point of having this master's degree. Otherwise, we could just be another technician or another IT person at the help desk if we don't have that broader idea of the situation that we're in and the people that we're working with. So I think it has to be a combination. Yes, it's nice to have the skills, but as somebody mentioned, the idea of how do we learn how to learn? How do we learn how to keep those skills up is important too. So.
I guess earlier I didn't have time to go to this direction, but now I have a chance again. I would say it. One thing I feel strongly about, looking back my experience and projects and librarians that I have interacted with, is that I think asking the right question is the ability to be able to ask the right question is very important. In data science, I think this phrase, asking the ability to ask the right question has been mentioned in many occasions, many conferences and training workshops. But I think even though we are not practicing the data science per se, I know several of you do not consider we are really practicing the data science in most people's mind, but we still do a lot of, still have a lot of activities related to data science. But I think even though we are not crunching the data, we are not writing the code, we're not, but the ability to ask the right question means relate back to what I talked about, analysis of domain data problems in the communication with domain experts. And they know what they know, but you don't know what they know. So be able to follow follow the conversation. And when they talk about workflows, when they talk about procedures, and when they talk about the problems, you can quickly identify where the problem is and then ask the right question so the conversation can moving towards the productive side. So, and then in the end, you can quickly identify where the problem is, and then identify and come up with the right solution. And I think this ability is built upon your skills and knowledges. That's what we call technical, theoretical and technical skills, because you would have to have database knowledge, data modeling skills, and also understanding familiarity with metadata standards and all those, and and of course reference skills. And with all that, you can actually lead the conversation rather than follow the conversation. And I think when you talk to scientists, and they are very enthusiastic about what they do, but they can talk for hours about, that's my experience. When I talk to our faculty who's working on that gravitational wave detection project, he just go on, and then you have to be able to pull, the experts back to the track that you want to lead to. So and this is the kind of, all these are related rather than isolated, and that's what I want to emphasize. Go ahead.
Yeah, so what we tried to do at the Center for Astrophysics is try and do things at sort of a best practices level, to try and scale up more so than, so we've done some things of sort of best practices on how astronomers should share their data and other things like that. And just recently with the journal, in molecular spectroscopy, we worked with a group. Actually, Megan did a lot of the work. It was great, with our new assistant head librarian. And really try to develop best practices for the community. This is what's happened, this is where it's headed, and have that sort of macro view and really influence from that level, because you can get lost in the weeds sometimes. And you and I have this conversations about these conceptual things, where are we headed, and how does it hook into this? How can we, and we just, we're involved in a if you have the chance, look at the hashtag Jupiter Days. That's, I'm like marketing them, but that's another thing. Again, we're thinking where these things are going and how they hook into the ecosystem.
Jupiter with a Y.
Jupiter with a Y. No, yes. Sorry. But I think that's it's really, I'm always worried about scale, and I'm also worried about how getting mired in the institution and the sort of workflows that we use. I try to rise above that with the things that we do and think of what industry is using. So our astronomers are very nervous about their skills, and they're at the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. Our graduate students and postdocs, they can get a job anywhere, I think, but they're still nervous that academic opportunities are shrinking, and they are really interested in data science, and we're holding an alt career day for them. And the whole idea is to bring in people and talk about the industry skills that they need so that they can, and that's what we're sort of rolling into now, is just besides what we did in data scientist training for librarians, but bringing it to the astronomers and creating a more partnership, a partnership between the groups to learn about these new skills. And I think it's resonating with them. A lot of them are interested in what we're bringing to the table now.
A lot of things that Jane talked about, I think are very important. I'm going to come back to it. But one of the things I'd like us to keep thinking about and conceptualizing is what exactly is the intellectual foundation of data science. Is that some kind of probability theory? Is that somehow linked with Bayesian's statistics? Is that actually, how does that actually link with visualization? How do we actually process code, big data? Things like what exactly is the intellectual foundation? So this is the theory part. Because when we talk about library information science, the intellectual foundation is information behavior theories. There are a lot of information seeking, information behavior theories, and looking at information as a life cycle. We talk about information searching, managing, sharing, and things like that. We all have a lot of empirical research related to that, but when we come to data science, is there a set of theory that can help us to better link different pieces? It's just not take pieces from computer science, pieces from statistics, pieces from visualization, and then put it together and say, this is data science. There has to be a linkage somehow. So that's something I don't know what it is. I think we need to keep thinking about it. The second thing is, there's a set of professional foundations for, when we talk about information, or LIS as a profession, there's a set of skills that's necessary for LIS professionals. So what is the determining course skill set for data scientists or data science librarians? They're not the same thing. But I think what we need to also think about is, are there a set of analytical skills we're required for data science students to learn? Are there a set of visualization skills, as we talked about before, communication skills, and so forth? Even machine learning, more hardcore computer science related things that we need them to have. But one of the things that either Carrie or someone talked about process, learning about process. Just so is important. We can think about process model as what Jan was presenting in a workflow analysis. Sort of the sequence of different parts of analysis. Is this the process model that we can adopt to think about these are the professional skills that we want, the more hands-on part that Anna mentioned. We want to learn something with practical practical skills embedded in it. So maybe we can take some of the process model that's very well evidenced by Jane's research, because it's actually coming out of research. So the interview skills, the generalization skills, and the other skills. I know you listed a lot there, but I don't remember. But maybe the process. Through this process, what different kind of skill we need people to have, and that's the professional skill set that we can incorporate in the curriculum.
So I think we need,
oh, sorry.
we have one more question from the audience. Vicky, I had a question, and then I need to kind of wrap up. But this is a great conversation between the two groups, and we wanted to use this opportunity to have the two to come together. So we want to ask the last question.
One of the things I struggle with as a manager and also as someone who has done work in this area is trying to find for my staff, I'm sure many of us feel the same way too, affordable programs that will give our staff the ability to show expertise in an area, whether they are earning expertise or they are learning expertise. And are the library schools willing to develop programs that are affordable, that would help returning librarians and information professionals get the skills they need? Certainly we can help through the science programs across the country. We can do what Chris is doing. We can pick things up in workshops. But sometimes there's a need for a certification that is affordable.
I think that's a very good question. I think to tell you the truth, I have tried in the last 2 years to write a proposal to IMLS, the Institute for Museum and the Library Service, to request funding, support, training of librarians, on-the-job librarians, to get the data science certificate from our school. But I think their funding policy has switched to community learning, national platforms, and this data thing seems to be fading out. So, that's for the funding side. But I think this is still a valid request and demand from the market. And I definitely will take your suggestion and question back to our school and to see what we can do. And I think we have the foundation, like we have the data science certificate, and our MLIS program has a significant portion of it that can be used to already training future librarians in this domain. So I think that we just signed a 10-year contract with 2U, which is an online education company, and we are going to roll out our online program in less expensive. Syracuse's current tuition is very expensive, but this 2U partnership will roll out some programs that's much less, I think I can't say much less, but I think it's less expensive than the campus program. That's what I can say.
So I think one possible area is I mentioned they have, I get these calls from e-science infrastructures for countries, and they say we want to train our librarians to be ready for this next phase, and so that seems like an area that has great potential. There are other libraries that are starting to do this, so I've been consulting with NCSU that started a new program as well. But I've seen people put in their resume that I was part of the Data Scientist Training for Librarians program as sort of a form of credit. And I don't know if it's working, but they do it. And so, obviously I believe that there's, the certification is really needed, I think, in some place. But I'm not sure about the online part, though. One of the places that we were going, because IMLS did approach me and said, we love this program, we want to do something with it. It kind of crashed and burned, and Matt and I have been talking about another iteration of this, but I think it's it's been definitely hard to get something like this up and running, and it desperately needs to happen. But we really need to. It needs to be in person. In my mind, some of the things that you have to do to learn to do this stuff, it has to be in person. It can't be online. And that was one of the things that often people came to me and said, put it online, or like, can you put, I can't drive all the way to Cambridge. Can you actually stream it? And I refused to kind of do that because I only did it maybe in special cases and then stopped doing it. Because I think in that environment, that's where that mentality sort of changes, and you can't necessarily do that. You need to be with your peers. You need to be with your cohort to learn.
Yeah, that's really good.
I think there's things like software carpentry and data carpentry that more and more people are getting trained in, and so that's an option, is finding those people. There's still a cost thing, but at least you've got this 2-day thing where you're intensively working with other people helping you. So if that's what's there. Unfortunately, the BD2K grants that the National Library of Medicine putting out, which Elaine has the one and NYU has the other. I mean, they're developing modules, but again, it's still an online thing. So, is it going to be an affordable online thing that you could do at your own pace, or do you commit yourself to spending 2 days a week intensively immersed in something? When they have the biomedical informatics week, that used to be at Woods Hole and is now at Georgia. That's incredible to be able to go and be immersed in it. And so there is something to be said still for pushing yourself and doing something like that and taking that opportunity when you can avail yourself of it. Because you're right, the hands-on, it's never going to be as good as the hands-on. But if a good online thing is a substitution, then you can try for that. So hopefully yours goes well.
There's also you mentioned software carpentry and data carpentry. I've also heard something about library carpentry, which I think is specifically focused for librarians. So that's picking up speed. So that might eventually be a resource for people.
So we're actually trying to get something like that for the fall here.
Oh, cool.
Jen Burris and some folks to work with us in trying to take some of the tools-based things and make them available, and then have our roundtables, around that. And the plan is for the fall we would have a series of these things based on the software and data carpentry model. This year we were able to grant to fund researchers attending those workshops at a variety of institutions. And now our next phase is to adapt that to a kind of librarian-light model. Awesome. So we'll see how it goes. And then we've also got a grant in to take that model and put it online as well. So we'll see. Those are just some of the things we're trying to do as part of our regional medical library program. And a lot of people in this room are collaborating with us. Well, I want to ask all of you to thank our panelists.